If you're planting perennials this month, there is something you need to know before you put a single plant in the ground. July is one of the toughest months of the entire gardening season. The soil is warmer. The sun is stronger. Water disappears almost as fast as you apply it. And unlike spring or fall, you don't have much room for error. A mistake that a plant might easily recover from in April could completely destroy it in July. But here's the surprising part. That doesn't mean you shouldn't plant perennials now. Every day, gardeners across the United States, Canada, the United Kingdom, Europe, and even parts of Australia successfully plant perennials in the middle of summer. The difference isn't luck. It isn't expensive fertilizers or special products. It's simply understanding which mistakes matter most and avoiding them before they happen. In fact, some of the healthiest perennial gardens you'll ever see were planted during less than perfect conditions by gardeners who simply knew how to work with the season instead of fighting against it. Today's video isn't just about July. Yes, we're focusing on July because that's when many of you are watching this. But every mistake you're about to learn applies whether you're planting in spring, early summer, autumn, or, if you're watching from Australia, even during your winter planting season. These are the mistakes that determine whether your perennials struggle for years or become those beautiful, low-maintenance plants that seem to get bigger and better every single season. Before we dive into today's video, I have a major announcement. The gardening guide you've been writing to me about for months is finally here. The Plant Once Garden is officially out. You have been incredibly patient with me while I took the time to get this right. It is approximately 150 pages of everything this channel teaches, gathered into one complete reference, designed with a hand-drawn heritage cover and warm cream pages that feel like a guide your grandmother would have owned. Inside, you'll find the 90 perennial plants that come back every year with almost no labor, 6 complete garden plans, the no-labor planting calendar, and the hydrogen peroxide method explained completely. I've also included the specific perennials that bring hummingbirds singing and dancing right outside your window, the chapter on what your garden becomes over 20 years, and the mistakes that kill perennials. This is a reference you can lean on for the rest of your gardening life. You can scan the QR code on your screen right now, or click the link in the pinned comment or description below to get your copy. Thank you again for your patience. Now, back to the garden. Let's start with the mistake that happens before most gardeners even leave the garden center. Mistake number 1. Buying the wrong perennial for your climate. This is probably the most expensive mistake gardeners make. Not because the plant costs a lot, because you can spend years trying to make the wrong plant survive in the wrong climate. You've probably heard someone say, "This plant is impossible to grow." Most of the time, that simply isn't true. It's impossible there. A perennial that performs beautifully in Colorado may struggle in southern Florida. One that thrives in England may collapse during a dry Mediterranean summer. A variety that laughs at Canadian winters might slowly decline in Australia's mild coastal climate. The plant isn't wrong. The location is. One of the biggest misconceptions among beginners is believing that every perennial sold at a local nursery is automatically suitable for every garden nearby. That's simply not the case. Always check the hardiness information before buying. In the United States, use the USDA hardiness zone as your starting point. Canadian gardeners should refer to Canada's plant hardiness zones, which account for factors like winter temperatures and growing conditions. Gardeners in the United Kingdom should think less about extreme cold and more about moisture, drainage, and seasonal rainfall. Across Europe, conditions vary enormously. Northern countries often deal with shorter growing seasons, while southern regions must contend with intense summer heat and drought. And if you're watching from Australia, remember that July is winter. Advice aimed at North American gardeners often needs to be flipped completely because your growing season is different. Climate matters. But hardiness isn't everything. Heat tolerance matters. Humidity matters. Rainfall matters. Wind exposure matters. A perennial might survive your winter perfectly, but slowly decline every summer because it simply cannot cope with your heat or humidity. That's why experienced gardeners don't just ask, "Will this plant survive here?" They ask, "Will this plant actually thrive here?" There's a huge difference. If you're unsure, choose proven performers. Plants like coneflowers, daylilies, yarrow, black-eyed Susans, and many salvias have earned their reputation because they succeed across a wide range of climates when planted correctly. The right plant in the right climate solves half your problems before you've even picked up a shovel. And speaking of choosing the right place, that leads directly into mistake number 2. Mistake number 2. Planting in the wrong location. Here's something most plant labels don't explain very well. Full sun. It sounds simple, until July arrives. Many gardeners assume that if a label says full sun, then any sunny location will work. Not necessarily. Morning sun is very different from blazing afternoon sun. A perennial receiving 6 hours of gentle morning sunlight may be perfectly happy. The exact same plant receiving 6 hours of scorching afternoon heat reflected off a brick wall can become stressed almost immediately. This becomes especially important during July. The midday sun between roughly noon and 4 o'clock is dramatically more intense than morning sunlight. That's why you'll often hear experienced gardeners say, right plant, right place. Look around your garden throughout the day. Where does the sun move? Which areas receive morning light? Which areas remain shaded after lunch? Where does heat reflect off patios, fences, walls, driveways, or stone pathways? Those microclimates can raise temperatures several degrees higher than the rest of your yard. For gardeners in the southern United States, southern Europe, or warmer parts of Australia, afternoon shade can make the difference between a thriving perennial and one that constantly struggles. Meanwhile, gardeners in northern climates often benefit from giving sun-loving plants as much light as possible because their summers are shorter and cooler. Shade plants deserve equal attention. Hostas, astilbes, bleeding hearts, many eucharis. These aren't weak plants. They're simply adapted to different conditions. Plant them in relentless afternoon sun during July, and you'll often see scorched leaves, wilted stems, and constant water stress. Not because the plants are unhealthy, because they were placed in the wrong environment. Whenever possible, spend one full day simply observing your garden before planting anything. It's amazing how much you notice. That quiet corner that seemed sunny all morning suddenly falls into beautiful afternoon shade. That empty space beside the fence becomes an oven after lunchtime. Those observations will save you far more plants than any fertilizer ever will. Mistake number 3. Planting too deep or too shallow. This mistake is so common that even experienced gardeners occasionally make it. The instinct is understandable. People assume planting deeper makes the plant stronger. In reality, it often does exactly the opposite. Every perennial has what's known as the crown. That's the point where the roots meet the stems. Think of it as the plant's breathing zone. If you bury that crown too deeply, oxygen can't move properly through the surrounding soil. Moisture begins collecting around the stems. Eventually, fungal diseases develop. Crown rot begins. The plant weakens. Leaves yellow. Growth slows. And many gardeners blame insects or fertilizer when the real problem started on planting day. On the other hand, planting too shallow creates a completely different issue. Roots become exposed. They dry out quickly. Summer heat reaches them faster. Winter cold penetrates more easily. The solution is surprisingly simple. When you remove the perennial from its nursery pot, look carefully at the existing soil level. That level should usually remain exactly the same after planting. Don't bury it several inches deeper. Don't leave half the root ball sticking out. Simply match the surrounding soil level. If anything, planting a fraction of an inch high is usually safer than planting too deep, especially in heavy soils. This is particularly important with plants like peonies. Plant their growing eyes too deeply, and you'll often get healthy green leaves year after year, but almost no flowers. Gardeners sometimes wait 5 years before realizing the entire problem was planting depth. 5 years. For something that could have been corrected in 5 minutes. Little details matter, especially when you're planting something designed to stay in the same location for decades. Mistake number 4. Ignoring your soil before you plant. Imagine buying a beautiful new house. Fresh paint, perfect furniture, wonderful neighborhood. But the foundation is cracked. Eventually, everything else begins failing too. That's exactly what happens when gardeners focus entirely on the plant while completely ignoring the soil. Perennials don't just live in your garden. They live in your soil. And healthy soil is what determines whether roots can breathe, spread, absorb water, and access nutrients. One of the simplest tests you can perform takes less than an hour. Dig a hole about 12 inches deep. Fill it completely with water. Now wait. If the water disappears within roughly an hour, your drainage is generally good. If it remains sitting there long afterward, you likely have a drainage problem. Poor drainage kills far more perennials than drought ever will. Roots cannot survive indefinitely in waterlogged soil. They literally suffocate. Heavy clay isn't bad. Sandy soil isn't bad. Every soil type has strengths. The key is understanding how yours behaves. Clay holds moisture extremely well, but often drains slowly. Sandy soil drains beautifully, but dries out very quickly during summer. Loam, the famous gardener's dream, is simply a healthy balance between drainage, moisture retention, and organic matter. Fortunately, almost every soil can be improved. Adding compost year after year increases biological activity, improves structure, encourages earthworms, and creates healthier root systems. Think of compost as investing in your garden's future rather than simply feeding today's plant. One mistake many beginners make is digging a beautiful hole, then filling it with expensive bagged potting mix. That creates what's often called a bathtub effect. Water collects inside the soft soil instead of moving naturally into the surrounding ground. Instead, blend organic matter into the existing soil so roots are encouraged to grow outward rather than remaining trapped inside one perfect planting hole. Healthy roots don't care how beautiful the top of your garden looks. They care what's happening underneath. And that's exactly where successful perennial gardens begin. By the way, if you're enjoying this video and want a complete reference you can keep beside you in the garden, the Plant Once Garden is now available. Just scan the QR code on your screen or use the link in the description below. Now let's continue. Now that you've chosen the right perennial, planted it in the right location, set it at the correct depth, and given it healthy soil, you'd think the hard part was over. Ironically, this is where many gardeners lose perfectly good plants. Not because they did something wrong while planting, but because of what they did or didn't do during the first few weeks afterward. That establishment period is everything. A perennial doesn't become established the moment you put it in the ground. It takes weeks, sometimes months, for new feeder roots to grow beyond the original nursery pot. Until that happens, the plant is almost entirely dependent on the care you give it. And that brings us to one of the most overlooked mistakes on this entire list. Mistake number 5, leaving the plant root-bound. Take a perennial out of its nursery pot. What do you see? Hopefully, you see healthy white roots spreading evenly through the soil. But very often, especially later in the season, you'll find something completely different. A dense circle of roots wrapped around the outside of the root ball. Those roots have nowhere else to go. They've been trapped inside that plastic container for weeks or even months, so they simply keep circling. Many gardeners are afraid to touch those roots. They carefully remove the plant, slide it into the planting hole exactly as it came out of the pot, backfill the soil, water it, and walk away. Unfortunately, those circling roots often continue doing exactly what they were doing inside the pot. They keep growing in circles. Instead of exploring the surrounding garden soil, they remain trapped in their own little underground container. The result? The plant struggles to establish. Growth slows. Drought tolerance decreases. In severe cases, the circling roots can eventually begin wrapping around each other, restricting the plant's own water and nutrient uptake. The solution only takes a minute. Gently loosen the outer roots with your fingers. Don't be afraid if a few roots break. Healthy perennials recover remarkably well. If the root ball is extremely tight, make 3 or 4 shallow vertical cuts down the outside with a clean knife or pruning saw. It feels wrong the first time you do it. After all, you've just bought a beautiful, healthy plant. Why would you cut the roots? Because you're encouraging them to stop growing in circles and start growing outward. Think of it as giving the plant permission to leave its nursery pot behind. 1 extra minute during planting can save months of frustration later. Mistake number 6. Watering the wrong way. If there's one subject that confuses gardeners more than almost anything else, it's watering. Ask 10 experienced gardeners how often to water newly planted perennials. You'll probably get 10 different answers. That's because the real answer isn't based on the calendar. It's based on the soil. One of the biggest mistakes beginners make is watering every single day for just a few seconds. The soil surface gets wet. The leaves get sprayed. Everything looks refreshed. But underneath, almost nothing has changed. Water may only penetrate the top inch or two. The deeper soil remains completely dry. Guess where the roots start growing? Toward the moisture. That means they stay near the surface, exactly where July's hottest temperatures dry the soil first. Instead, water deeply, slowly, thoroughly. The goal isn't to make the surface look wet. The goal is to encourage moisture 6 to 8 inches below the ground. That's where you want the roots to grow. Deep roots are stronger. They're more drought-resistant. They're more stable. And they're much better prepared for next summer. A good deep soaking once or twice a week is usually far more beneficial than a quick sprinkle every evening. Of course, rainfall changes everything. So does soil type. Clay holds moisture much longer than sand. Cool climates require less frequent watering than hot, windy regions. Rather than following a strict schedule, develop one simple habit. Stick your finger into the soil. If the soil is still moist an inch or two below the surface, wait. If it feels dry, it's time to water deeply. Plants don't own calendars. They respond to moisture. This single habit can prevent both overwatering and underwatering better than almost any gardening app ever could. Mistake number 7. Forgetting about mulch. Here's a question. If you walked barefoot across black asphalt on a hot July afternoon, and then stepped onto cool grass beneath a tree, which one would feel better? Your perennials feel exactly the same way. Bare soil absorbs an incredible amount of heat. Temperatures at the soil surface can become dramatically hotter than the surrounding air. That heat stresses shallow roots. It speeds up evaporation. It encourages weeds. And every extra weed becomes another competitor for water and nutrients. Mulch changes everything. A simple 2 to 3 inch layer of shredded bark, compost, pine bark, leaf mold, or other organic mulch acts like insulation. During summer, it keeps the soil cooler. During winter, it reduces temperature fluctuations. Between rainstorms, it slows evaporation. Over time, many organic mulches gradually break down and improve the soil itself. That's a remarkable return for something so simple. But there's another mistake hiding here. Many gardeners pile mulch directly against the stems. You've probably seen it. Little volcanoes of mulch surrounding every shrub and perennial. It looks neat. Unfortunately, it traps moisture against the crown of the plant. Instead of protecting the stems, it creates the perfect environment for fungal diseases, crown rot, and insect problems. Always leave a small gap around the base. Think of mulch as a blanket. You want it covering the roots, not wrapped around the plant's neck. And if you're planting during July, mulch isn't optional. It becomes one of your greatest tools for helping new roots survive extreme summer temperatures. Mistake number 8. Feeding your plant instead of helping its roots. This one surprises a lot of people. You buy a beautiful perennial. You plant it. Naturally, you want it to grow as quickly as possible. So what do many gardeners do? They reach for fertilizer. More fertilizer. Stronger fertilizer. Extra fertilizer. Surely that will help. Actually, sometimes it does the opposite. When a perennial has just been transplanted, it's under stress. The roots have been disturbed. The plant is adjusting to completely new soil conditions. Its first priority isn't producing lots of leaves and flowers. Its first priority is rebuilding its root system. Heavy applications of fast-acting nitrogen encourage lush green growth above ground. The problem is that the roots often aren't ready to support all that new growth. The result can be soft stems, weak plants, increased water demand, and greater susceptibility to heat stress. This is especially risky during July. The combination of high temperatures and excessive fertilizer can place tremendous pressure on a newly planted perennial. Instead of pushing the plant, support it. Work compost into the soil. Use a gentle organic amendment if needed. Many experienced gardeners even prefer liquid seaweed or kelp products immediately after planting because they help reduce transplant stress without forcing rapid leafy growth. Remember, you're not trying to win a race during the first month. You're building a plant that might live in your garden for the next 20 years. Healthy roots first. Everything else follows. Let's pause for a second because by now you may be realizing something. None of these mistakes are particularly difficult to avoid. They aren't expensive. They don't require fancy equipment. They're simply small decisions that have enormous long-term consequences. That's encouraging, because it means almost anyone can become a better gardener by changing just a few habits. But the final 3 mistakes are probably the ones gardeners overlook most often. They're also the mistakes that explain why 2 people can plant the exact same perennial on the exact same day. And 6 months later, one garden is flourishing while the other is full of disappointment. We'll cover those next. By now, you've avoided some of the biggest planting mistakes gardeners make. You've chosen the right perennial for your climate. You've planted it in the right location. You've prepared the soil. You've loosened the roots. You're watering correctly. You've added mulch. You're not overfeeding it. At this point, you might think your work is done. Not quite. The next 3 mistakes don't happen because gardeners lack knowledge. They happen because people assume that every day in the garden is the same. It isn't. Especially not in July. Mistake number 9. Planting during the hottest part of the day. Imagine this. It's 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The air temperature says 92 degrees Fahrenheit. The soil temperature in full sun is even hotter. You've just removed a perennial from its nursery pot. For the first time in its life, its roots are exposed to direct heat, dry air, and warm soil. Within minutes, moisture begins disappearing from the root ball. The leaves lose water faster than the roots can replace it. The plant immediately enters survival mode. That's transplant shock. And in July, transplant shock can happen incredibly fast. One of the easiest ways to reduce it costs absolutely nothing. Simply change when you plant. Professional landscapers rarely install new plants during the hottest hours unless they absolutely have to. Instead, they plant early in the morning or late in the afternoon. Even better if the forecast predicts an overcast day or light rain. Think about what happens overnight. Temperatures fall. The sun disappears. Humidity usually rises. The plant suddenly has 12 to 15 hours to begin settling into its new home before facing another day of sunshine. That overnight recovery period is incredibly valuable. If you're planting during a heat wave, ask yourself one simple question. Can it wait? Sometimes delaying the job by 2 or 3 days makes the difference between success and failure. This advice is especially important for gardeners across the southern United States, southern Europe, and warmer regions where July temperatures can become relentless. Meanwhile, gardeners in northern climates may have considerably cooler conditions, making summer planting much easier. Australian viewers have the opposite situation. Because July falls during winter, many regions experience ideal planting conditions, although tropical northern Australia follows a completely different seasonal pattern. That's why gardening advice should never be copied without considering where you actually live. The calendar matters, but your climate matters even more. Mistake number 10. Ignoring mature plant size. This mistake doesn't usually become obvious until 2 or 3 years later. You come home from the nursery with 6 beautiful 1-gallon perennials. They look tiny. There's lots of empty space between them. So naturally, you plant them closer together. It looks full, finished, instantly beautiful. Then 3 summers pass. Suddenly those little plants have doubled, sometimes tripled, their original size. Leaves overlap. Air circulation disappears. Humidity stays trapped between the plants. Powdery mildew becomes more common. Rust diseases spread faster. Plants compete with one another for sunlight, water, and nutrients. Instead of growing into graceful clumps, they become one overcrowded mass. The temptation is understandable. Nobody enjoys looking at empty soil after planting. But experienced gardeners know something beginners often don't. The garden is supposed to grow into the space. That's the goal. Read the mature width on the plant label, not the current width. If a perennial eventually spreads 3 feet wide, believe it, because many vigorous perennials happily reach those dimensions when they're healthy. This becomes especially important with plants like daylilies, black-eyed Susans, bee balm, yarrow, and many ornamental grasses. Give them room. Your future self will thank you. Remember, gardens aren't designed for today. They're designed for what they'll become. Mistake number 11. Planting it, then forgetting about it. This might be the most common mistake of all, especially in July. Spring is forgiving. Cool temperatures. Frequent rain. Lower evaporation. Plants often receive natural help from the weather. July doesn't offer that luxury. Many gardeners spend an hour carefully planting everything. Water thoroughly. Stand back to admire the results. Then they don't check the plants again for 4 or 5 days. That's often enough time for serious damage to occur. A newly planted perennial hasn't yet developed roots beyond its original container. It depends almost entirely on that small root ball for water. If that root ball dries completely, recovery becomes difficult, sometimes impossible. Now, this doesn't mean you should water every day. It means you should monitor every day. There's a huge difference. Walk through your garden each evening. Look closely. Are leaves drooping during the cool morning hours? That's a warning sign. Does the soil feel dry below the surface? Time for a deep watering. Has heavy rain already soaked the ground? Leave it alone. Successful gardeners don't follow rigid watering schedules. They observe. The first 2 or 3 weeks after planting are the most important. Once new roots begin exploring the surrounding soil, the plant becomes dramatically more resilient. Think of those first weeks as helping a new neighbor move into town. They need assistance at first. Eventually, they're completely independent. Now that you know how to plant without killing your investment, let's look at the 5 bulletproof summer perennials that will actually reward your hard work right now. The answer depends on your climate, but these 5 have built an outstanding reputation across many regions when planted correctly. 1. Coneflower, Echinacea. If I could recommend just one summer perennial for most gardeners, coneflower would be near the top of the list. It's incredibly heat tolerant. It attracts bees and butterflies throughout summer. Later in the year, the seed heads provide food for goldfinches and other birds. Once established, it's remarkably drought-tolerant and asks for very little maintenance. For gardeners across much of the United States, southern Canada, and many parts of Europe, it's one of the easiest long-term investments you can make. 2. Daylilies, Hemerocallis. There's a reason daylilies appear along highways, shopping centers, and public landscapes. They're tough. Heat, cold, poor soil, occasional drought. They simply keep growing. Modern varieties come in almost every color imaginable. Plant different bloom times together, and you'll enjoy flowers over a much longer season. They're also excellent for beginners because they're incredibly forgiving. 3. Yarrow, Achillea. If your garden receives full sun and tends to dry out during summer, yarrow deserves serious consideration. Its flat flower clusters attract countless pollinators. Its fern-like foliage stays attractive throughout the growing season. And unlike many flowering perennials, it actually prefers leaner soils over overly rich ones. Too much fertilizer often produces weaker plants. Sometimes less really is more. Black-eyed Susan, Rudbeckia. Few plants announce late summer quite like Black-eyed Susan. When many gardens begin slowing down, this cheerful native perennial is just getting started. The bright yellow flowers seem to glow in evening sunlight. Pollinators love them. Birds appreciate the seed heads later in the season. And once established, they're among the easiest perennials to maintain. 5. Sedum, stonecrop. Finally, sedum. If you're the kind of gardener who occasionally forgets to water, this plant forgives you. Its thick, succulent leaves store moisture. Its late-season flowers provide valuable nectar when many other blooms have faded. Even during winter, the dried flower heads add architectural interest to the garden. It's one of those rare plants that actually performs better when you stop fussing over it. Here's the encouraging news. None of these 11 mistakes require expensive equipment. None require years of experience. And none require a perfect garden. They're simply habits. Small decisions that compound over time. Whether you're gardening in the United States, Canada, the United Kingdom, Europe, Australia, or anywhere else, the same principle applies. Healthy perennial gardens aren't built through luck. They're built through good planting practices repeated over and over again. Remember the essentials. Choose plants that match your climate. Put them in the right location. Prepare your soil. Plant at the proper depth. Loosen root-bound plants. Water deeply. Mulch correctly. Avoid excessive fertilizer. Respect summer heat. Allow enough space for mature growth. And most importantly, don't plant your perennials and disappear. Give them the attention they need during those critical first few weeks, and they'll reward you for years, sometimes decades, to come. One final thought before you head outside. If you're watching this in July, don't assume you've missed your opportunity. Yes, spring and early fall are generally easier planting seasons. But July doesn't have to be a deal breaker. With the right techniques, careful watering, and a little patience, you can still establish beautiful perennial gardens that return year after year. Plant wisely. Plant with a plan. And remember, the work you do today isn't just for this season. It's an investment in every summer that follows. If you're ready to stop wasting time on plants that die every winter and finally build a garden that takes care of itself, don't forget to grab your copy of The Plant Once Garden. It's 150 pages of everything this channel teaches, completely mapped out for you. Just scan the QR code on your screen right now, or click the link in the description below to get started. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.